Namaste everyone from tummy.com, a yoga platform for yoga teachers and yoga teachers in training. In today's video, we will cover how to create a yoga sequence around a peak pose. A peak pose is the primary pose around which you plan the yoga sequence, and in today's video, we cover Thunderbolt Pose as the peak pose of Vajrasana. Now, if we were to ask you to create a sequence around Thunderbolt pose, how would you go about it? Is there a method that you would follow? Before you even begin to create the yoga sequence, it is very important as yoga teachers to practice the pose while keeping your students' flexibility and ability in mind, while also identifying the different muscles involved, the joints involved, and also getting an overall feel of how the body is while in the pose. So let's first get down to Vajrasana, making notes. While here we know that the lower body is fairly active when compared to the torso. This also involves keeping your back straight, which comes with only if you have hip stability. And we also know that while the lower body is active, the main stress is at the ankles and on the knees. So having made these notes, it will help us now understand how to organize the warm-up poses. So we have chosen 12 such poses as part of the warm-up, starting from our toes right up to the hips, which involves the entire lower body. Now, how do you know or how should you go about organizing these poses? Now, we know that Vajrasana, when we practiced it, we know that, there was some stress at the knees and the ankles, and we know most students would find this part of the body to be the challenge. So keeping that in mind, well, the reason why this could happen is because of seated, long hours in front of the desk, or it could be the day-to-day activities that, reduces the range of motion of their ankles and knees. And therefore, it is best to start from your toes, moving upwards to your hips, and that's the order we have chosen here. So we start first with the dynamic flow of variation of mountain pose here. So students just can bounce up and down on their toes and back onto their heels. Going into the variation of downward facing dog pose, again, this is done in a dynamic way, working equally on both sides of the hips here while we're opening up the ankles. Then going into a static position, another variation of downward facing dog, where here you are focusing on how the body feels and also opening up the back of the knees. So you can request your students to stay here for longer. And by now, right from the toes, we have moved down to the knees here. So, they should be comfortable holding it for a little longer. From here, we move down to a variation of garlin pose where it kind of also is a relaxing pose after working on the ankles because not all students would be comfortable to go beyond this. So we actually come down to a resting pose while also teaching your students to connect to how they feel right now while seated here. Are their knees, still tight? Are their ankles tight? Are their hips okay? From here, we move on to a seated position, opening up the ankles, moving clockwise and anti-clockwise. This really helps in, increasing the range of motion of the ankles. From here, we know the fire-lock pose is a great hip opener. It helps us to even work on bringing stability on both sides, both hips. And you can even ask your students to bounce their hips over here, which again, keeping awareness of their ankles and knees. Another variation of opening the hips, but here our focus is the ankles and the knees. So you can, request the students to be aware of how the knee feels and how the hip feels. And also a very important note that you work on both sides equally so that you bring stability. While doing this, you finally come into a variation of bound angle pose. This is a symmetrical pose which talks about equal attention to both sides of the body, the right as well as the left. It also gives them the feeling of how they are feeling after, warming up right from their toes. You're actually resting your ankles here, right from their toes, moving to their hips, and stability in the hips. Another challenging pose we take here is the toe balance, just to give a feel to the students as to where they are right now with their practice. Can their ankles take the weight of the hips already, or does it require some more warm up? So, most students may need more, or some students may be ready. From here, we come back into the garland pose, which we did earlier. The reason while here, you can request your students to kind of connect to what they felt here and how they're feeling right now here. Are they any different? If they're any different, then we know that they need more warm up. Or if they're feeling much comfortable and stable, then we know they're almost there and it is kind of good as a warm up. A slight variation here, we're talking about a deeper opening of the ankles and a deeper opening of the lower leg muscles, which is again just kind of getting a sense of comfort and a sense of confidence with their lower body. Um, so we have covered these 12 warm-up poses and forming the first part to peak pose yoga sequences. And in a nutshell, what we covered today is talking about practicing the pose. In this case, we practiced Vajrasana. We made notes, identified those 12 poses, identified the warm-up poses. In this case, we identified 12 of them. Pause for a moment here to rewind, to see and reconnect to what was just explained. Hope you enjoyed and learned the structure to follow with regard to this Thunderbolt pose as the peak pose. In our next video, we will cover the actual practice of Thunderbolt pose along with its variations and the cool down and the counter pose for the same. Drop in your comments and see you soon from all of us. Namaste from tummy.com, a yoga platform for yoga teachers and yoga teachers in training.